Great. I think the participants are leveling out. I'm sure some others will join, but yeah, welcome everyone. So this is the live Q&A session for the 2022 Real Estate Assessment. My name is Kevin and I'm part of the member relations team for GRESB. Member relations is one of our semi-new account management teams for all GRESB members. I've actually been at GRESB now almost 3 years and started out on the real estate team. So I still have a good technical knowledge set that I can apply and help moderate today's session. And I actually transitioned over to member relations 1 year ago when we started up the team. So I'll be moderating and I'll also be joined by my colleague, Max. Max, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, as Kevin said, I'm Max. I'm part of the real estate team now with GRESB for a bit more than 2 years. And therefore, yeah, more than happy to help you out with all your technical questions here today during our live Q&A session.
Great, and we're also joined by Fiona. Fiona, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Fiona. I've been with GRESB for around 9 months and a half. I'm part of the member success team, and I'll be assisting today by answering some of your questions and Q&A chat.
Great. Thanks, Fiona. Okay, so a few housekeeping items before we really get kicked off with the Q&A. So within Zoom, you have the Q&A function. So please use the Q&A function to actually ask questions directly to us. Myself, Max, and Fiona will kind of be going through the questions and determining whether we want to answer them live, live on the call, or if in some cases they may be too specific directly to your entity, for example, and that's something we can handle offline. So please use the Q&A function. If you need to, get something directly from us, you can use the chat, but Q&A is best. Also a note, we will be sending the recording to all those that have attended today, as well as all those that have registered, in case some of your colleagues weren't able to make it. So yeah, we'll get a nice summary email out to your teams once we get through the call. So with that, I think what we can do is go ahead and get started. So what we did is actually start with some of the most frequently asked questions. Whether this is first-year participants, second-year participants, or even ones that have been around for a while. So we'll kind of go through, let's say, 10 questions that happen pretty frequently. We'll open it up to some of the questions that have been posed. So please go ahead and begin to log those questions so we can kind of start building up a list. And then we'll go through those. And then we also have some other prepared questions that if, we don't have a super interactive audience, we can, of course, fill the time with those good questions. So please go ahead and ask those in the Q&A function, and we'll start with some that are, very normally asked. So to start, I'll kick it off. So how can you add, change, or remove users directly within a reporting entity? So of course, this happens directly in the assessment portal. Once you've logged into the assessment portal, clicked into the reporting entity, on the right side, you can see access rights. And then once you've clicked into access rights, there's a number of different things that pop up on the next page. So of course, at the bottom, what we're looking at here, the main one is invite new collaborator. So this is how you invite a new user to your entity. There's various roles associated with each user who's connected to an entity, and we'll show the permissions of each of those roles on the next page. And a couple of other things to point out on this slide is we have revoke access. Revoke access would be used in the case that someone's left your organization and you need to remove him or her from that. So that function is there for you, as well as this last one, which is manage asset level data. So manage asset level data allows the user to actually, look into the asset portal, upload asset spreadsheets, et cetera. So that's an option that can be ticked. In terms of what the specific really roles and their permissions that they have, they are listed here on the screen. I'm not going to run through them all, but account manager is, of course, the most important. In the case that we do have to contact your entity during the reporting period, or even in July for some reason, July, August, during the scoring process and validation process, we would just email all account managers on the account. So it's okay to have more than one. I don't think we need 5, but more than one is okay to have for account managers. Again, where this table can be found, it's found directly beneath this invite new collaborator button in the assessment portal. So these are the different permissions that you can look at. Next one is templates. So this is actually a feature that is used somewhat, but we think could probably be utilized in a better way, especially for managers that submit more than one entity. So on the right, we have this button called Manage Templates. Templates basically allow you to copy or apply a template response across multiple reporting entities. So for example, let's say you're a manager that submits 2 entities to GRESB in 2021. You've pre-filled those assessments for 2022, and you create a new entity for 2023, which is a total of 3. Instead of with that new entity having to fill out from scratch, what you can actually do is template a response that was previously submitted and apply that to a new response. So there's really 2 ways. You can either take it from an old response or a current response that's already been created, or first create an overall template and apply that to all of the underlying entities. So there's a couple ways to do that, but yeah, definitely check out the manage template section. It can definitely be a big time saver in terms of reporting to GRESB for those multiple entities. So yeah, again, and if you have any questions about any of this, of course, reach out to the GRESB contact and our member success team will be in contact with you. Next one, response check. Max, over to you for this one.
Yes, for sure. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, the response check is a service that we provide together with our third-party validation partner, SRI, that's situated in the United States. And the response check is really like a high-level check by our partner, utilized mainly by first or second year participants, because this is really going through your entire assessment at the point of your validation, of your response check, and trying to find gaps, room for improvement within your overall reporting, the documents you have uploaded, so they give you hints and tips of how you can actually improve your documents, meaning how you can meet the requirements that we have when it comes to validation. Here, very important, it is not pre-validation. So they don't validate already the documents for you. So you don't have actually an overview in the end, what will come out of it. It's really more or less just a guidance for you or help for you to fulfill our overall reporting requirements. So your experience within our first 1-2 years of reporting to us, for example, are as pleasant as possible and as efficient as possible for you. The deadline to request a response check is June 1st. And then the response checks can be scheduled till June 15th. So we can then still give you like 2 more weeks after the last response checks to amend your data input before the reporting deadline. Important here as well as the question that we constantly get or frequently get is whether you have to submit your assessment prior to the response check. This is a question we can answer with no. You should just have your response as complete as possible, but you should not actually submit it because you can still amend the data afterwards to improve.
Great, Max. And we actually had a question from Elizabeth on how much the response check costs. So the response check is for this year is 2,000 euros or 2,400 US dollars. And that is applied per reporting entity. It doesn't matter how many components are being submitted. It's just per entity of response check and the response check scope in terms of the covering management, performance in terms of portfolio level indicators, as well as development component that can be found on the GRESB response check landing page. So yes, we've covered that one. I'll move to the next slide for you, Max.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. Another question or question that we always get is also around our evidence pieces, because certain indicators within our assessment require evidence to be uploaded. And one question that frequently comes up is that an evidence document applies to multiple entities, and if this can actually still be used. Short answer here is yes, of course, because we have multiple fund managers that as a fund manager report to us 5, 10, 50 funds. So if you have the policies for them in place that are applicable to all of your funds that you manage as a fund manager, you can always report these policies to us or any other document that are applicable to the entities. Very important here is really just like a tip, which we show later on as well, is that the losing the words here right now. Okay, that the documents need to be applicable, that you clearly can see from the evidence pieces or the open text box that we provide underneath each document upload, that we can then explain how this document is actually applicable to the reported entity. But definitely, if a document is from a parent company, this can be applied to multiple entities at the same time. Next slide. Other question is, as you might have seen already, our assessment is purely in English. So our assessment language is English, and therefore the question that we often get is, what can participants do when the evidence pieces aren't actually in English? So for example, in German, in Japanese, in Italian, in Spanish. So in these cases, you have multiple options. First option would be you translate the entire document. This actually is quite heavy on when it comes to burden, workload for you. Therefore, you have other options as well. Because very important for us is only that we see within the evidence pieces the paragraphs or sections that are applicable or actually meant to be validated by our validation partner for the respective indicator. So in that case, you should only actually translate these sections that are meant to be seen or meant to be read by our validation partner. An example would be you have a policy, very general sustainability policy, but now you upload this policy for the indicator P01, which is environmental policy. In that case, you should only then actually translate the paragraphs and sections that are applicable to the environmental policy issues that are ticked within the assessment. So really be wise here to only work as much as you need to fulfill our requirements. Here, for a few more tips and tricks, as I already said, we only look at the sections, or we only need the sections within the documents that actually are relevant for validation. Therefore, please make it as easy as possible for our validation partner to find these paragraphs. You can imagine if you upload a document of 100 pages, our validation partner will eventually go through the entire document, but making it easier for them by indicating actually the relevant pages, paragraphs on the pages that you actually use for the evidence. As I say, only translate the relevant parts, so you don't need to translate the entire full document. So you can also provide us with this translated summary of the documents, for example. As I already mentioned before, make clear that the document applies to the entity. So for, so you only have to, this can also be done in the open text boxes, but it also always have to be very clear that the document applies in one way or another to the reported entity. And very important, always within our reference guide, we have a section called validation. In there, we always show or have like a list of requirements listed out and also examples of documents that can be used to be uploaded and then would be accepted. So really check out the reference guide, the requirements section there, because a lot of details and tips on what kind of documents you can upload are included in this document.
Yeah, and I'll add something there. So yeah, our team SRI did spend a good amount of time reviewing these for this year. So reinforcing that the requirements did not change. It was simply just adding more content, adding more descriptions, adding more examples so that you as the user can understand how best to document for that. So it's not any changes. It's more just about being more descriptive, being more prescriptive in terms of what we require from the validation perspective.
Another question that we frequently get is about GHG emission scopes. When it comes to GHG emissions within our assessment, they always relate to our energy consumption that is reported in the energy indicator. So what you can do for energy or for GHG emissions is you always look at your energy consumption and then apply emission factors to your energy consumption to calculate your GHG emissions. Then the question comes up, what are the different scopes? So because we have scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And within our asset spreadsheet in the instructions tab, under then GHG emissions or GHG indicator, we have this little table where we show you exactly the energy type, meaning fuel, district heating, cooling, or electricity, and the corresponding floor area type, then mapped towards to a GHG scope. An example would be here, if you report whole building as tenant controlled, for example, in a distribution warehouse, and you have then the fuel consumption here, it's scope 3 emissions. Because another question that we always get is there actually any difference between landlord controlled and tenant controlled tenant spaces? In our assessment, all emissions that come from tenant spaces are scope 3 emissions. While you then have everything that is landlord controlled, like whole building landlord controlled, or the base building, meaning shared service and common areas, are then scope 1 and 2 emissions, so the direct landlord emissions.
Great, thanks, Max. So I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in that I think we can begin to just kick off with some of those, but maybe first, as a reminder, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And then I will just run through this main general question. Of course, everyone is, if you don't already know, in terms of the 2022 real estate assessment changes, these were very, very minimal year over year. So I'm not going to go through all of the changes. I mean, there were probably only 4 or 5 slight changes, but for example, we've renamed C-suite level staff to C-suite level staff and senior management. That's an example. Or we've also added social housing as an investment type as part of the entity and reporting characteristics. So in terms of actually finding these changes, please reference Appendix 1 of the reference guide. That will be the best place for you to understand exactly what happened year over year. Yeah, Appendix 1 of the reference guide is where you'll find all of the supporting information on this. There were a couple on response check that I thought we could answer first. So yeah, does the response check cover performance consumption data? I can handle this one. So the response check really covers all evidence-based and other answers submitted to GRESB. It does not cover performance consumption values. We have, I think there's hundreds of different automatic validation rules that are applied to your asset level data to ensure that the data is within certain boundaries. Of course, we have our outlier check methodology that also checks to make sure your data is within certain boundaries as well. In terms of us or our validation team trying to check performance data, even within an entity of 10 buildings, there could be hundreds of utility bills that we cannot actually begin to validate or verify. So that's not currently part of the response check scope. That's really all handled by our automatic validation process. If you have more interest in what that automatic validation process looks like, we have Appendix 5 or 6 of the reference guide that's about validation. Max, do you know what it is off the top of your head? Maybe it's 3.
It could be even 2A.
Yeah, it is a 2A. I think it's Appendix 2A. Appendix 2A is maybe the validation. So check out that one, and that is very prescriptive on what's manually validated and what's automatically validated. So yes, performance value is not part of response check. I see the other one of when and how the invoicing process starts. So GRESB has invoiced all entities in January that participated in 2021. If you or your client is potentially submitting to GRESB in 2022, please get in contact with us so we can get that process started as quick as possible. The invoicing is not connected to the actual submission in the portal. So we handle this, it's a very separate process, but anyone that participated in 2021 should have already received their invoice. If you have not, please contact admin@gresb.com. So that's like administrative, but admin@gresb.com, and they will ensure that you receive the proper invoice for 2022 assessment.
There were actually one more question on the response checks.
Oh yeah.
And this question is about whether when a fund reports to us 3 separate funds, and then actually requests a response check for all 3 of these funds, if then all 3 response checks are actually invoiced. In this case, yes, they will all be invoiced because the response check is actually per reported entity. So per assessment, we will then have 1 response check invoice.
Yeah, and I would recommend that, if you're submitting 5 entities, it's not fully necessary to have a response check on all 5. Think of what the response check scope covers. If that's evidence that's at an asset manager level, and you're applying those same policies, it's the same response across all 5, really 1 response check could cover, and you apply the findings of that response check to your other entities. However, there may be differences in the way that you respond across entities, even from the same fund manager. So it's up to you to determine if you want to do that. But yes, I would just make that note. Is there, Max, do you see another one?
Not on the response checks. I think we can now go away from there and then take the other questions.
Okay, maybe we look at the leader and the light supplement. So this was the first question asked from Anonymous. There's plenty of Anonymous out there asking questions instead of the name. So I guess you know who you are. Leader and the light supplement. This is something for publicly traded entities that submit to GRESB. This is just part of the typical real estate assessment. So when you go to, you've launched the assessment, you've started the assessment. I believe when you go to, you're actually in the assessment portal and there's the settings in the bottom left, that's when you can enable the leader and the light supplement. If for some reason that's not there, or maybe we have missed something, please let us know. But I would recommend you to get in contact with us via GRESB.com/contact to make sure that that's routed in the correct way. Max, do you want to go with the one on reporting entity having challenges acquiring tenant control data owing to indirectly managed from Michelle? Yeah. And maybe do you want to click done so that question the others in the audience can see?
Yes, just did that. So the question is about like the landlord controlled and tenant controlled areas, and then the difficulty, of course, of a lot of tenant controlled areas to collect actually the data points. Here, our peer benchmarking actually comes into place, or our benchmarking system overall comes into place. Because what we do is we benchmark or look at data at the property subtype level, and then within each property subtype level at the control type. So we actually benchmark data collection or data coverage in this case at for landlord controlled and tenant controlled areas separately. Meaning in the end as well, you are then also compared against other landlord tenant controlled areas or assets with more tenant controlled areas, meaning everybody within your peer group or comparison group has actually the same difficulties. And therefore, if you even actually are able to collect a little bit more data, not full data, but at least a bit more than your peers, you would definitely can show this quite well within our scoring approach overall. So it's really that our benchmarking approach looks at the difficulties and tries to balance these out by peer benchmarking and benchmarking different values at the different control types separately first.
And Michelle, we'd be happy to go into more detail. It's probably one of the most technical parts of how our assessment is scored in terms of how we benchmark landlord and tenant control data separately, and that's at a property subtype within a region. So your aggregated score for data coverage for your entities is an aggregation of all, depending on how many property types and regions you have, can be a lot of different data points that result in that aggregated data coverage score. So we'd be happy to elaborate a bit more on that. I see the question on, will the new, well, not new indicators, but the new for the 2021 assessment, the climate related risk management indicators be scored? So this was RM1 to RM5, RM6.1 to 6.4. So these were basically the very similarly aligned TCFD indicators. They will not be scored in the 2022 assessment. Scoring did not change year over year. So it's the same as 2021. So that has, remained stable. However, we are working internally on a not internally, we're working on a TCFD alignment report that we're working to soft launch here very soon. So that's something that, on our landing page of GRESB.com, you can go to the TCFD product and see a sample report. We've also had a webinar on it if you are interested in further understanding what we will offer from a TCFD perspective. Max, do you want to answer the one from Lauren on third-party verification?
Yes, absolutely. This is actually, I actually just clicked done. So the question is whether we accept third-party verification statements or a statement that the third-party verification is still undergoing for the current reports. We actually, this is one part that Kevin mentioned earlier, that we added a few things or overhauled our validation requirement sections a bit in the reference guide. So we added actually guidance on this year, that when you have your verification statements from last year and the verification process for this year's data is still underway and won't be done before the final submission date, we accept last year's verification statements with then a document that states that the current year verification process is still undergoing. So you can definitely provide us with last year's verification statement, and we will accept this when you state clearly that it is underway. So you will not lose out on these points. Because we that case, give benefit of the doubt for our participants.
Great, thanks, Max. I will answer one from Vasari on, hi, what is counted as an EMS, so an environmental management system? Is it a sustainability software? Basically, we have a very descriptive definition of what an EMS is and the RM1 indicator of the reference guide. So I would highly recommend that you reference that section. An EMS can be many things. Of course, generally an EMS is aligned with ISO 14001 that's kind of the industry standard on what an EMS is, but there's other ways to approach an EMS. There's different alignments to an EMS compared to actually certifying to ISO 14001. So I would highly recommend you to look at the RM1 guidance on this. It's actually one of probably our longer indicators. So if you have questions after reviewing that and whether that's applicable, please reach out to our help desk. Max, maybe the one from Henry. So is there still no assessment of embodied carbon this year?
The assessment hasn't changed much compared to last year, except for minor tweaks here and there. So the main assessment is still the same. So yes, again, we don't have direct indicators measuring or collecting data on embodied carbon. However, we do have within our development component certain indicators that tackle the topic of embodied carbon. So we do ask about whether an entity performs lifecycle assessments, for example, or actually is monitoring embodied carbon, but we don't have any quantified metrics so far captured or any performance metrics captured on embodied carbon. This will hopefully come in at a later stage along our 5-year roadmap that we currently developed with the industry together.
Yes, so I can also note here, so embodied carbon has been identified as one of the leading topics as part of our strategic roadmap work. So we will, this is a high topic within the industry. So we'll very much, I'm sure, address this over time. As Max mentioned in the development component, there are a couple of indicators that look at embodied carbon and whether it's assessed and disclosed, but not yet at a point of measuring. So yeah, more to come on that. I see another one, Max. I'll give you a break while you want to look at the other ones of when can and can't consumption data be extrapolated or estimated? That's a pretty large question. So we have an estimation methodology appendix in the reference guide. So that's your place to go. It's very difficult to probably explain over a call. So please check out the estimation methodology appendix. And if you have a certain situation that applies to your entity, please reach out to us about that one. Max, do you have a good one to look at?
Yes, there's actually a question on, in the case of an asset with a single meter covering both common and tenant spaces, which scope should the emissions be entered? In this case, when you have one single meter, and then the question is whether this building is landlord controlled or tenant controlled as a whole. Because in this case, you would then report this building as at the whole building level. Then you have to determine whether this whole building is landlord controlled or tenant controlled. And depending on this classification, it would be either landlord controlled, scope 1 and 2 emissions, depending on the energy source, or scope 3 emissions if the whole building is tenant controlled.
Thanks. Max, to the question from Alex Steele, that one's a bit technical, Alex, so I'm thinking it would be best for us to address that one directly with you. So we will have a full list of the questions and make sure that we follow up with you on this one. It's about an estimated gap. So I just recommend that we cover that one directly with you because it's a super relevant question, but maybe a bit specific to get into on the call. Lauren, I see your basically follow-up as in this was about the data assurance and verification and providing that statement about it's still being worked on. Basically, can the final verification statements be submitted at a later date? That's actually not necessary. All that's required for us is to understand that it's happening. And of course, that is the verification statement that that the entity would be using for their own disclosures, but it's not necessary to provide us to at a later date. And then the follow-up is if it's an entity that's it's their first year reporting, and so they would not have last year's statement to submit. Unfortunately, there's really no way around that. The data has to have been. I actually need to check the guidance on this. So they would not have last year's statement to submit. I believe we I need to check the validation requirements on that. My apologies. I'm not sure if we require last year's statement plus the upcoming statement, or if the upcoming statement's okay. Max, are you aware of that? I'm not positive.
I think we stated both. But yeah, we could definitely double check this.
Yeah, so Lauren, we'll come back to you on this one.
There was one question from Tiana in regards to data assurance. If data from only one year is assured as opposed to current reporting year and previous year data being assured, verified or checked, does this impact the score? These tackle our indicators MR1 to 4. So in there, we ask for third-party review of the reported performance data. And this always looks at the current reporting year. So if in this case only the 2020 data would be assured or verified, then you should not report on this in the 2022 assessment, which covers the 2021 data. If the 2021 data, but not the 2020 data, is assured or verified or checked as a third option, then for sure you are more than welcome to report on this year. So it really depends on which data is checked by a third party and which data is applicable to the current reporting year.
I have a question that says, in which cases might evidence only be partially accepted? There are a number of different ways evidence can be partially accepted. We can take a simple example of an environmental policy. Let's say you've selected 8 issues for the environmental policy, and within the document, the validation team can only find 4 of these. That would be a reason for partial acceptance, because basically what you're claiming in the document or what you're claiming in the response is not supported by the document. Another would be if you're claiming that your ESG report is verified or assured to a certain standard, and we cannot find that assurance or verification standard in the report, that would be another reason that something could be partially accepted. So as long as you've complied with the validation requirements as outlined in the reference guide, it should be fully accepted. But basically, over-reporting of issues, over-reporting of alignment or verification, providing documents that are maybe outdated or not applicable to the reporting period, those are all ways for evidence to be partially accepted. I see another question related to documents that I can answer. So, do additional supporting documents need to be uploaded compared to last year? So we have a pre-fill functionality. The pre-fill functionality I would encourage everyone to use. Basically, it just pre-fills all of your data from last year's assessment that is applicable year over year. So for example, policies, procedures, stakeholder engagement, many of these don't necessarily need to be updated every year. And if you don't actually edit the response, the same validation decision from last year will be applied. So it's as simple as pre-filling. If you don't have a new environmental policy or social policy, or your code of conduct wasn't updated, you can go ahead and just not edit that response as long as it remains true, and then the same validation decision will be applied. However, there are some indicators that are annual specific, such as MR1 to 4, which is about assurance and verification of data. Also RP1, which is annual reports. Of course, we're not going to pre-fill an annual report from 2021 or 2020. So it varies per indicator.
There's another question from Paulina about the sourcing of renewable energy and then how to report this.
Yeah, and Max, hold on, before you get into that one real quick. So for the audience, what we're trying to do is when there's a question, we'll mark it as as answering live, and then it will actually come into the answered section for you. So if you look at the Q&A, the question from Paulina is the one that Max is about to answer. So if everyone wants to follow along, it's a bit tricky to reread all of the questions, and I'm sure it can get a bit muddled. But you can check the Q&A section to see the question we're talking about, which is the one from Paulina at the moment.
Exactly. So the question, thanks, Kevin. So the question is about landlord procures renewable energy for the entire building, and then how to report this for base building and tenant spaces. So basically the answer lies already in the question itself. So if the landlord procures for the entire building the renewable energy and then bills afterwards the tenants for this energy, you should still report the part of the energy that's consumed in the base building for the common areas, and the part that is consumed in the tenant spaces in the respective fields, meaning common areas and tenant spaces. And then all consumption or the entire renewable energy that is procured by the landlord should then be reported under the respective renewable energy fields as well. So basically exactly how the question is phrased.
So I think there was a follow-up about my policies and basically how, on the point of being outdated, how old may policies be? We actually take our validation team, SRI, takes the approach of a policy is a policy. Policies typically do not have an expiration date. So if a policy was enacted in 2010, it can still be submitted to GRESB. Of course, I don't think that'd be best practice internally to keep policies, from that outdated. But if for some reason there's a policy that's been around for that long, a policy is a policy, and the validation team would, assume, because we're providing it to GRESB and it's dated as a policy, that it's still in place. So there are, in terms of an annual report, we do have reporting year requirements around that, or employee satisfaction surveys, for example, have to be from the last 3 years. So a satisfaction survey from 2016 would not be accepted. It just depends on the indicator. There's some time sensitive indicators and others that aren't, but generally a policy is a policy. So that's the approach from us on policies.
There's a question from James Lee about the evidence that is required for our resilience indicator, in this case RM 6.4. So for the entire audience, evidence is for these indicators optional, so you don't have to upload evidence, but in case you want to upload evidence, there are then certain requirements that should be met. But these questions, especially the second part, when James asked about if we have any suggestions for climate-related financial risk assessment tools, not from top of my head. So James, we will come back to you on this definitely as well afterwards. I know I still have an email from you on this topic open anyway. So you will hear from us on climate-related risk assessments very, very soon.
Great, we've got you, James. So come back to you. Next one, Max, anonymous participant from specific requirements for green lease contracts is there a GRESB standard for green lease contracts?
This is a very fast answer. No, we don't have that. However, there is an indicator. I do not know from the top of my head right now which indicator exactly it is, but there we ask about the percentage of green leases within your portfolio. This is like the only moment where we tackle kind of green leases overall. However, when you have, of course, green leases, this will have trickle-down effects throughout the entire assessment, because with green leases, you have certain policies in place, certain refurbishment plans probably to make the buildings more efficient, which then trickles down into lower energy consumption, better intensities. So there are, of course, when you have green leases, the trickle-down effects, but there's no requirement within our assessment to have green leases in place directly.
Okay, thanks. I'll try the one from Rich Paul. So for data assurance purposes, does GRESB have acceptable data tolerances, such as a 1% error or difference between utility usage data and the value shown in data providers, such as measurable? So I'll kick that one back over. But in terms of GRESB is not making the call on whether data is assured or verified. The assurance or verification company is making that, and whether they're doing a limited assurance. I know there's a lot of terminology in that language, but what the evidence is required to GRESB provide is the actual assurance or verification statement, or in the case of third-party check, that the data has been checked. So it's not necessarily about the methodology behind assurance. Assurance is assurance. Typically that requires an accredited assurer for the specific data points that you're referencing. So there's a lot of formalities around that around that language. So it's something that we're not making the call internally. It's something that assurers and verifiers do from their end.
Cool. Next question from Lewis about calculating waste generation by weight. Waste is a very special topic always, and we know that about its place within our assessment. Well, but we actually had recently a discussion about this within our team in real estate. So what you can do is that you're basically following exactly again what is asked in this question. So and this would not count as, so to say, estimation, what we don't want to have. What you can do for waste is you have, for example, a monitored number of pickups of your dumpsters, and you know the volume of it, and then you have like standard weights, more or less, or fractions of weight, or how much weight is attached to a certain volume of these weight dumpsters. When then multiply this factor with the number of pickups, you have then your overall weight kind of estimated or calculated. And we allow this definitely because it rather overstates your actual weight production, because not necessarily not for every single pickup, every single dumpster will be completely filled. So in this case, since we know about the problems around waste data gathering, we allow this kind of calculation methodology.
Yeah, and Lewis, on that one, would we be happy to send you kind of our updated like allowances for how to best calculate waste volume? So that's something that I'll mark down to send you as a follow-up. The next one from Lisa. So this is a really good question. What about GRESB localization? Basically, standards, local waste networks, materials, other content differ from country to country, and GRESB seems to be very European and North America centric. How do you approach that? So currently, it's a global assessment. The way that our previous governance structure worked was we actually had regional benchmark committees, one for the Americas, one for Europe, one for Asia, and one for Oceania, so Australia. These 4 benchmark committees, of course, tried to make the assessment as globally applicable as possible, and we've continued to do that even with our new structure. Now those benchmark committees have been really pushed into standards committees, and the standards committees, and now that standards committee is one standards committee. So there are people from all different regions sitting on the same board, which will better allow information sharing between each of these people so that they understand what's happening in other regions around the world. In terms of currently, it will remain the same. However, whether materiality is introduced in the assessment over a longer term, whether this is applicable for residential real estate or hotels, or how we score energy in the US versus how we score energy in Australia, that's all something that is, I would say, longer term ambitions and at least being evaluated. So right now, it's a global assessment. It's applicable to everyone. We try to make it as applicable to everyone. So that's the current status on where we are at with materiality or locality or localization of the assessment.
And there's a question from Anonymous about the scoring of RA2. When you look at last year's response, RA2 is our indicator on technical building assessments. And the question is whether the aim is to have this portfolio coverage as high as possible. Short answer here is yes. So I always like to refer you to our scoring document, because in the scoring document, you will see exactly how we score these indicators. But in short, we do use the portfolio coverage as a multiplier for this indicator. So the higher your portfolio coverage for energy, water, and waste technical building assessments, the higher your overall score for this indicator.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Max. We have the last question on, for how is waste data coverage filled in? Basically, when you have paper and cardboard weights, but plastic is not known. Max, do you want to try to give this one a shot? I think it's maybe more about the methodology.
Yeah, this is also a tricky one, because what we often sometimes do, like one question that we actually received for them today is about someone has hazardous waste but not non-hazardous waste, or vice versa. How would then be the data coverage? Here we say you have half of your potentially measured waste, so to say, therefore you create 50% data coverage. With cardboard and paper compared to rest of your, or when you have paper and cardboard but not plastic waste, it's really hard to determine the data coverage on this overall. How much would this make up from your overall waste production? So maybe we can discuss this as well within the team a bit further to have like maybe even deeper breakdown of this, and then come back to you afterwards with a bit of guidance.
Yeah, I think that's good. Please, yeah, please reach out to us on that one. The next question from Santiago. So this is actually an infrastructure related question. So what I'll do is I'm not in a position to be able to answer that, but we have the record of your question, so we'll make sure that that is forwarded over to the infrastructure team so they can best handle that with you. Yes.
Another good question from Lewis is about how should you report GAF of an asset under major renovation? So meaning at what point in development should the GAF reflect, or what point of the development should the GAF reflect a pre or post renovation? With the asset level GAF report, first of all, this is not mandatory, so you don't have to report asset level GAF values. The only mandatory part is that you report the percentage of GAF allocated to each property subtype within your assessment. If you do want to report on asset level GAF values, I would say in this case, you should look at the current state of the asset. So at the current state, or at the state of the asset at the end of the reporting year. So if the reporting year is over and major renovation is still ongoing, you maybe don't know yet the actual value afterwards. So therefore, rather take the pre-renovation value, and then once the new reporting year starts and the major renovation is over, you know the new value. Then you reflect the new value actually in next year's reports to us. So
I would agree
have a
with
look at that kind of the end of year value.
The next one from Michelle. So how does GRESB account for medical waste? So we benchmark at property subtype level and region. So medical waste would be at least accounted for in terms of medical waste diversion rates. And so this would likely be something that's reported as hazardous waste. So that's part of the assessment. We have two buckets of non-hazardous and hazardous. So medical waste would very likely fall within hazardous. If you have more specific questions on how best to report that, yeah, please definitely check with us. Yeah, hazardous waste is a way where you can, fill in your medical waste and then the appropriate disposal routes for that. Max, are you aware of the next one on the or go for the one from Lewis?
That's actually a follow-up from Lewis, exactly. On how should you report asset level gap of a new construction that is not yet completed? With new constructions, you might not know exactly the gap yet. So here is actually really then an estimate of what you think that this value, this asset might be valued at after finalization of the product of the project. But especially for new constructions, it might be even better just to leave out the asset level gaps and just report on the percentage of gap allocated to each property subtype within our indicator DR 1.1.
Yeah, I think for this one, it's expected that it's some form of an estimate. We do provide a bit of guidance in the development reporting characteristics section of the reference guide. So check that out, but I know that it is not as descriptive as maybe we want. But yeah, for your specific example, let us know. But in the end, it's more of an estimate. And hopefully, that GAV allocation would not, change peer groups. If you're a residential developer, you'd be within a residential peer group, for example. So yeah, happy to discuss that one further. Well, I see, so we've got 10 minutes left. Maybe what I'll start with, and we're kind of getting to the end of the questions. What I'll start with is there are a few more slides I just want to run through as a reminder to everyone on the call. And then if there's any that pop up over the next minute or two, and I see there's one that we can get to, we'll go through those. So in terms of assessment resources, so one of the main landing pages that many don't know is documents.gresb.com. This is the main landing page where you can find reference guide, assessment, scoring document. Scoring document is important that some are not aware of basically how the assessment is scored at an indicator by indicator level. So this is where you can find that. It's a quick landing page that anyone that's reporting to GRESB should have as a favorite over the next, or a bookmark over the next couple of months. The other one is our just resources page on the website. This is where there's additional resources such as, aggregation rules handbook for those that are more interested in the aggregations process from asset level data to assessment portal data, validation rules, scoring simulator, etc. So there's plenty of resources for you to use, both on our website as well as the documents.gres.com. So please feel free to check those out. In terms of our training platform, so we have an online training platform that allows anyone to log in once you've provided a bit of information about, kind of who you are. And there's plenty of content about what the assessment is, what is GRESB, what is real estate assessment, what are the separate components, what is the asset spreadsheet, and how to report through that. So that's definitely a good place to check, especially for the newcomers at GRESB. If you know GRESB backwards and forwards, this is probably not the place for you, but highly recommended for any of those. Or if you want to invite people from your organization to learn a little bit more about GRESB, it's really a great place to go to get some intro knowledge. Another one, our help desk team, staffed by member success, as well as people from my team, marketing, communications, etc. So our help desk team, we have gres.com/contact or this more fancier link that we've created more recently. This is where you can go to log in any question to GRESB, and we typically respond within 1 to 2 business days. We do have a pretty quick turnaround on that. So if for some reason a ticket has not been responded to, please make sure that that's escalated to us so we can deal with it in the most appropriate way. But yeah, it's quick turnaround, and we understand that it's a busy period for you. So we want to get back to you as quick as possible over the reporting period so that you can continue on with your reporting. Just as a reminder about the upcoming timeline. So April 1st is when the portal opened. June 1st is when the response check request deadline is over. So over the next 2 months, you can request a response check. June 1st is the deadline to do that. I would recommend please doing that earlier because we will likely maximize our capacity. So if you're going in on June 1st to request, they may be sold out per se. Yeah, June 15th is when we begin what's called the reporting boundaries review, but really July 1st is the big date of portal closing. So that's the day everyone has to submit their data by. June, July, August, et cetera, are the validation and scoring period. September 1st is the preliminary results release. So this is when we launch the review period, which allows you to log in and basically challenge, question anything in the assessment that you may think you may have reported incorrectly or that GRESB has scored incorrectly. So we have the review period as kind of a way to make sure that everything is looking good for the October 1st release. That's final results when you as the participant can access the results, as well as when the investor who has access to reports can access those results. So that's the timeline. I do see we have a couple more questions. So Max, let's handle those over the next few minutes, and then we can get to, we'll close it out.
Yeah, I can start already with the first one. The question is, can we claim solar power that is on site, but is leased in that case? So it's like a third party that has like solar panels on fund's asset. In this case, it depends on whether this energy produced from these solar panels is consumed on site or not. If it is consumed, you can report it under generated on site and consumed. If it's only produced by a third party and then exported, in this case, it would not fall under the scope of our assessment. Therefore, in that case, you would not be able to report it to us. So it depends on whether there's consumption of this energy on site or not.
Great. The next one from Paula. Do we get a certificate of completion after completing the GRESB online training? That's not currently something we offer. It has been something that's been brought up, and we'll be sure to mark that as feedback as something that you could receive at the end of the training platform. So Paula, yes, that's a good question. But yeah, we'll think about that one. The next one, Max, for you about gross floor area and estimations.
Yes, exactly. So this is a frequent question we also get, because especially when you look at UK, for example, or Australia, the main figure is net lettable area, not the gross floor area. Or any time you only have the rentable area as an area number, we actually provide within our reference guide in, I think it's Appendix 3B, property types. We have in one column our common area ratios. These ratios are built on actual data, so calculated based on actual data that we collected over the years, meaning the split between common areas and tenant spaces. We calculated these ratios for different property types, and these ratios can then be used to multiply or to calculate the common areas for your assets that can then be added to the rentable area or net lettable area to form or to get to your total asset size, the gross floor area. So please refer to our reference guide and the common area ratios that we provide there.
Great. I think that's all the questions. So yeah, I think we can just close it. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining the Q&A session. So yeah, very, very good luck over the coming months or coming couple of months that you are finishing up your GRESB assessments. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We have a fully staffed help desk team to help you as much as possible during the reporting period. So they're there for you. And yeah, we look forward to talking with you over the coming months. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thanks everybody.
Bye everyone.